Hello and welcome to the video. Happy New Year, 1st of 2023. Hope you had a fantastic Christmas and hope some of the giveaway stuff that I've been doing has kept you entertained. Common at this time of year to kind of look back on the previous year and to look forward to the one that we're now in. And looking back at 2022, looking back through all the stuff that I got up to as part of the hobby and all the stuff that came in and the videos that I've made, there are some things that have stood out to me. And I thought it'd be fun to make a video to cover that stuff and then maybe talk about some of my hopes for what we're going to get out of the hobby in 2023. So let's very quickly talk about the highlights. Highlights for me, there were some beautiful fixed wing models. First one was this thing here. This was the standout model that I built from a fixed wing point of view in the whole of 2022. This is the Atom RC Swordfish. Comes pre-installed with iNav in it. There's also RD Pilot versions and you can get it as kits and things as well, but a really fun, beautiful plane. Breaks down for easy transport, but I love the fact that Atom RC has been the first vendor to think about actually including a flight controller and a setup inside. So those people that watch the iNav videos, and you may be one of them, where you watch them and you go, oh, that just looks like too much hard work, you can kind of do it out the box. Atom RC though have missed a trick. They could have made this so much easier with a really good setup out the box. The iNav setup continues to be horrific, and just have the manual so that the manual just talks about here's how you set up a video, your radio so it's all set, and maybe even include things like radio profiles for common radio types on Edge and OpenTX. They could have made it super simple. I'm sure somebody is going to do that and be the first and kind of take Atom RC's idea and deliver it in the way that I think most people involved in iNav would have loved to have seen. 2022 also saw me try my first 3D printed wing. For those of you that stayed with the series, you'll know that it ended in complete disaster. 4 months of building ended in 1.5 seconds of flight. Yeah, it wasn't really flight, was it? Let's be honest. However, it was a fun thing to do. Talk about 2023, but I wouldn't mind having a go at another 3D printed plane, maybe something smaller, less unwieldy for the hand launch stuff. And there are lots and lots of fantastic models coming out now, some of which have been taken by vendors and turned into phone models, usually without consulting the original project. But 3D printing is absolutely becoming a more common part of the hobby, and with the lack of cheap shipping and also the lack of innovation of new funky stuff coming around, it seems to be the projects creating and developing 3D printed planes is where the innovation is currently happening. This year also saw me get back into helicopters. Helicopters were probably the thing that really first caught my heart again as I came back into what you would call the modern hobby. Going back quite a long way, probably 2006, something like that. So a pretty long time ago. Now this year I got in the OMP Hobby M2 and the M2 Evo. Beautiful models up there from Steve at Scotia RC. Put links to all this stuff down below if you want to go and have a look at the videos for it. But that is an amazing piece of kit and it really reignited my passion for it. I am tempted to, with my FPV heli, take the analog FPV off and put the Walk Snail air unit on, the little 1S air unit that I got in recently, to have a HD FPV helicopter. We think that quadcopters, particularly powerful ones built for racing, are quite powerful and reactive. Whew. Wait until you try that with a variable pitch head on something like a helicopter. It catches you out the first couple of times you blip the throttle. You're suddenly at hundreds of feet altitude. It's quite impressive. Now, one of my predictions for 2022 was that Veto was going to become more of a thing, and although it's probably not as big as I thought it would be, it's still become a much more mainstay part of the hobby. In January, I looked at the OMP Hobby SMO VTOL, an expensive piece of kit, but an absolutely beautiful one. Then Ben and I up at 3DXR did a series on building a 4+1 VTOL, which is how he does it. Then I took that knowledge and tried to figure out all the stuff that you find out when you do it the first time for yourself and kind of documented and shared that. And then towards the end of the year, we had the jumper Zake Shake, whatever you call it, 800 VTOL that was inspired very heavily, or copied, from the Mini Hawk 3D printed project. That's a fantastic piece of kit, and also very, very inexpensive. Well, inexpensive for a VTOL. You can buy 5 or 6 of those Jumper 800 VTOLs for the cost of one of the OMP Hobby SMO VTOLs that I looked at in January. And then finally, for those of you that have started watching the series already, I'm currently converting my Ranger T1, my white one, with the official VTOL conversion kit using a Maytech flight controller and doing all that stuff with Ardu Pilot. So at the end of the year, I'm going to end up with maybe 3, maybe 4 VTOLs in the stable, where at the start of the year I ended with none. And I think other pilots are starting to get into that as well, but it's becoming much more accepted. Lots of manufacturers now starting to think about VTOLs as an alternative. And it does really mean for those places where you haven't got lots of room to land a fixed-wing aircraft, because most of us are happy kind of doing a chuck to get it into the air. It's the landings that take 200-300 yards. Being able to land it in a 6-foot square just opens up the possibilities. Another first for this year, I got my first laser engraver. I like gadgets. We have my little 3D printer behind me. That is the Fabricator 2 that Hobby King, back when they used to do lots of cool stuff. It's still going. Makes the odd squeak now and again. I'm having to oil the bearings on a regular basis, but you know what? It's still going. I also have things like bigger 3D printers, but the SculptFun S10 with Air Assist that I got several months ago now is becoming an incredibly useful tool. Things like the mounting plate, for example, in that VTOL that I'm going to build for the Ranger T1, I'd like a slightly bigger mounting plate. So historically, I had a 3D printed one. This time I'm just going to cut it out of a piece of balsa, and it will be sub-millimeter accurate, which will allow me to get it fitted in there beautifully. One of the big headlines for me was the release of the Walk HD system. Now, I am starting to become a big fan of that. I'm flying it a lot here. It's involved in quite a few of my key models that I love to fly, things like my Dolphin, things like that Swordfish, both have it in. So 2 of my favourite planes I've put Walk Snail in, and with the 1S units, we can actually kind of sneak it into lots of other places, not just the whoops that those things are designed for. I like the different business model and the way they interact with creators like me on places like YouTube is a refreshing change from lots of others. HD0 is also continuing to go from strength to strength. Their goggles came out. Carl Zhao, the guy behind all of it, is a very clever, passionate guy about this technology. And when you want low latency, HD0 is a perfect answer. And then, of course, we have the new DJI goggles and the DJI O3 Air units, which have come out as well. So for HD pilots, there is lots of choice. However, as I keep saying in all my videos, 60% of my audience, the people who are watching this, are analog only. And now, rather than being one choice, they've got 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 if you include some other stuff in that list. And that can be a little bit confusing. So I know lots of you are sat on the fence until spring, in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, when you can start to fly a lot more. And at that point, you may pull the trigger on one of those systems. I will continue to make videos without all the hype, without being paid to, just to kind of explain how all that stuff works so you can make an informed choice. There were some nice quadcopters as well. The number of quads that have been coming out has slowed down dramatically since the whole quadcopter bubble burst 5-6 years ago now. So the people who are still making quadcopters are making them not because they're trying to make a ton of money and jump on the bandwagon. They're making them because they're passionate about them and it's something they really want to do. So for example, we have things like the Armatan Beaver, wacky name, but an absolutely beautiful piece of kit. Also impressed with the Gep RC Cinebot 30. I think lots of reviewers were impressed with that. And also their Mark V was a lovely piece of kit as well. HGLRC also impressed with their Sector X5. That's a really solid all-rounder 5-inch quad. And there's a couple of the vendors that are definitely worthwhile mentioning. Darwin FPV with some of their stuff. They make really nice kit and it is very attractively priced. In fact, I'm probably going to have a video on some of their new stuff coming very shortly. Radiomaster continue to be my #1 radio manufacturer at the moment. I have the TX16S, have a couple of them here. Obviously, we had the Zorro back in January, that smaller handheld unit, and then we had the Boxer. I still would love a TX16S just shrunk down a little bit, just go on a little bit of a diet. So, you know, when they go on holiday, they can put the speedos on. That kind of smaller radio, that is really what I'm after. I liked the Boxer, but there was a couple of switches, extra switches and a few things on there I would have loved, which would make that radio perfect. And lots of people really want color screens now. I like color screens for the telemetry apps that I use, but actually for those smaller radios, kind of a backlit LCD is perfectly acceptable. The majority of pilots that I know never look at the radio apart from when they're selecting the model. Couple of really key projects as well that have become a mainstay in the hobby. There's obviously the Pascal's multi-protocol project, which is now everywhere. Those radios and those 4-in-1 systems, as well as the CC2500 individual single chip versions of the multi-protocol stuff, are now everywhere. So you can pretty much get those from everybody. So again, if you're using any of these projects, send them a couple of quid, a couple of dollars. For those Americans, quid is a colloquialism for pounds. Just send them enough for a cup of coffee. Not enough care has been taken with some of these projects, in my humble opinion. We need to kind of give a bit of love back so they can continue to innovate and get the time spent on them to continue to improve them. Other big ones, obviously, is ExpressLRS. That has become a mainstay in the hobby. We're on 3.x now. It has got an awful lot better for non-multi-rotor pilots. So now fixed wings, we have lots of different options for telemetry. We have lots of different options for the resolution of the channels. So we don't just have kind of a 6-position channel, a 64 or 128 position channels for channels 6, 7, 8, and 9. You can have full resolution channels, which is great. Looking forward to see what those guys do this year, because to be honest, I would really like to get away from that channel 5 having to be high to turn all the goodness on. That's kind of a legacy thing for multi-rotors, and for pilots that don't use a flight controller in their models, it's just one of those kind of legacy things that we can kind of do without now if you're going to support fixed wing too. HTX has grown up a lot this year as well. I did a video recently, and that's the first version where I'm starting to feel very relaxed about the whole thing. I've loved the idea of HTX. Again, lots and lots of the usual pundits who only fly quads were saying, it's amazing, you've got to upgrade now, OpenTX is dead. About a year ago, it was nowhere near ready if you used any more than 5% of the radio that you need to fly a multi-rotor. It's now not in that state. Key things like Yapu and INAV telemetry scripts are all working on it. Things like the latest high-speed protocols that you can run on ExpressLRS are all needed. You need HTX for all that goodness. So if you are into the modern hobby, then HTX is definitely the way to go, maybe on your next update. I'm really excited to see what HTX is going to give us. Last couple of things, highlights from me, is that I have been incredibly impressed with how we all benefit from the work of a small number of developers, passionate, very smart people who give out their goodness and IP for free via the projects. Talking specifically not only about the ones I've already mentioned, but things like the WTFOS hacks that are available for the DJI goggles and those kind of projects. Again, if you use any of them and you get the benefit of them, chuck them a little bit of money just to say thank you. We need to reward those people and keep them excited about developing for us, because unfortunately, I'm starting to hear more and more from some of the developers that the big names in the hobby that used to be the powerhouses of innovation, they're kind of stepping back from that now, because what happens is they blaze the trail and then all of the projects kind of build on that IP, and then that IP, because it's free as well for the software, kind of becomes the default. So we need to make sure that these projects are being looked after, because we are now really starting to rely on them. Last note this year is that in 2022 started to see Gyroflow, another one of those projects, becoming more embedded in the hobby with lots of new cameras, things like the Cadix Walnut, things like the RunCam Pro and the updated version that has the 4K and the wider field of view, with gyro stuff inside and that wide field of view and 4K, meaning that you can stabilize it, cut the edges out, and you're not going to have a horribly pixelated video at the end of everything. Really fun to see that happening, and it means that you can smooth that video without having to pay GoPro prices, because I don't want a £300-400 bumper at the front of my quad that every time I have a little oopsie is going to be destroyed. I'd much rather have a 50, 60, 70, 80, £100 camera that's at risk rather than something that's 3, 4, 5 times that, potentially going to be smashed. So what about my personal hopes for 2023? Well, relatively short list this. First and foremost is that I hope some of the prices come back down. It feels like lots of people have been profiteering from some of the issues around fuel prices and those kind of things, the chip shortage. Then, you know, at the moment, the O3 Air unit is the best part of £200. It's out of the price range of lots of hobbyists. I would love to see some of the prices come back down. It used to be you could get a £20 flight controller, a £20 GPS, and you could stick iNav or Betaflight on something and have a lot of fun. That kind of money will just about scrape you a flight controller these days if you're not going for one of the really new funky ones. The recent Maytech Veto flight controller that I bought for that Ranger T1 build I'm currently doing was the best part of £70. It's getting very expensive, and I really hope that that starts to stabilise and come back down a little bit. Things like the fuel prices have done here in the UK in the last 3 or 4 months. I would love to see more FPV ready fixed wing models in particular starting to come out. Again, with the exception of Atom RC and a handful of others, people like Sonic Model, people like ZOHD, who used to be powerhouses for this stuff, just seems to have completely lost the plot. I would love to see more of that stuff around, particularly those that are built for the modern HD FPV systems, where they particularly run warm. You know, things like the Swordfish not having the ability to kind of mount that stuff up in the nose and keep it all cool was a bit of an oversight, and I think lots of us reviewers talked about that and have modified their Swordfishes to stick the FPV right up at the front. If you have a twin, why wouldn't you do that? So that's the whole benefit of having a twin. You don't have the prop in front of your camera. So hopefully there's going to be more of that. I have lots of ideas for stuff. Many of us who are making content, who get their hands on lots of models do. Just waiting for some really cool stuff. That's why I think the Swordfish was such a nice model to get, because it didn't have an awful lot of competition last year. I also hope that we see HD0 and Walk now becoming a lot more viable for the longer term, so that when analog pilots start to invest in spring here in that northern hemisphere, that they go for one of those systems. HD0 just seems to be absolutely going along. It had that hiatus while it was kind of coupled up to Fat Shark that didn't really result in anything, but I'm excited now that both systems offer a real alternative to the DJI business model, and potentially you're going to get more than 3, maybe 4 years maximum out of your goggles before the vendor says, we're not supporting that anymore. Tough. I hope in 2023 that there is a lot more effort from vendors in particular putting together decent manuals for their models. It started to become an optional thing in the second half of 2022, something that really started to frustrate me. Things like that Jumper Zake 800, the manual as I'm recording this has still not appeared, despite insistent emails and messages from Jumper that no, it's absolutely coming, still not here. Come on. Things like the manual for the Atom RC Swordfish with the iNav stuff on board, again, terrible. The basic manual doesn't include things like the throws for the control surfaces, but they could have taken it the extra level and they could have given us a manual for an iNav ready plane. So if you don't want to have all the hassle of plugging it into the configurator, you just set your radio up like this with these channels in these orders, and it's going to be ready to rock and roll. They really did miss a trick. I also hope in 2023 that we see those vendors that are working and collaborating, or in some cases blatantly ripping off projects, do right by those projects. We've had instances at the end of last year where manufacturers have taken the IP and all the hard work and development that the manufacturer would typically pay for. They've just kind of taken the finished product that's usually a 3D printable design and kind of turned it into foam, not doing right by the project. And ignoring things like Creative Commons licenses is not cool. If you're going to do that, from a professional point of view, you need to be talking to the project to kind of say, look, we'd be interested in taking your design and turning it into a mass-produced model. Would you be interested in working with us on that? That we'll come up with a commercial arrangement to compensate you for that, to help you continue to develop cool stuff for the future. I think most people developing these projects would love to have that conversation, and I think there is an opportunity in the market for a trusted manufacturer to become a partner for that part of the hobby rather than just rip it off. So for all of you guys out there who are fixed wing vendors and manufacturers, and also the quadcopter guys, it's something to think about. Think of all the stuff that has been done with people like Dave C, a fantastic, innovative quad designer with some of those guys. I would love there to be more podcasts on radio control. I know I talked about this last year. It hasn't really changed. There are a handful that I listen to. So you got Let's Drone Now, you got the Noob podcast. There's a handful. If you know of any really good radio control podcasts, then do pop me a link down below. I would absolutely love to hear about them. There are a couple of people that I spoke to this time last year who was thinking of starting a podcast, and I've never seen them come to anything. I really used to enjoy a lot of those podcasts when I used to do a lot of driving for a living. I always learned something listening to that I didn't know. You can never get to this point where you're going to listen to a podcast where you're not going to learn something, because there's always somebody with a different experience or has used different technology. And there's been several aha moments when I figured something out listening to that stuff. So fingers crossed we get some more of those this year. And finally, I would like to see a lot of the YouTube stuff and the content creation stuff go back to how it was kind of 10 years ago. This is an impossible dream. It's something that I would like to see, though. I think marketing from manufacturers is now very aware of the influence that people like me and lots of other people have, and they leverage that. And in some cases, those channels are asking those people to pay handsomely for the privilege of them making a video to talk to their audience. It does mean that, unfortunately, you can get biased views that are biased because they are being paid for, and I'm not very comfortable with that. I will never get paid for doing a review. I will always try and be as honest as I possibly can. And there are loads of other channels, Andrew Newton, Gal Kramer, those kind of guys have kind of a similar philosophy. But some of the channels that are in it to do a day job has become a little bit mercenary, and I'm getting to the point where I can't really trust what they say because I can't trust the motivation behind it. I would love it to be like it was 10 years ago, where before all the vendors and manufacturers realized that this was part of a marketing strategy, they'd only really send you the product and then you kind of review the product and they were just happy someone was looking and talking about it. These days it's very targeted and focused and specialized. Look at that walk snail exposure video that they did with Rotor Riot as probably one of the worst examples last year, in my opinion, of some very blatant advertising actually put out there as a preview video. And I know all of us channels can be guilty of that to lesser or more degrees, depending on what it is, and some of our own biases are creeping through, but things like that were very blatantly an advertisement, and it wasn't clearly stated that actually that's what it was, in my opinion. So hopefully that's been an interesting roundup for 2022 and some ideas and my hopes and thoughts about what's coming in the coming year. If you have any particular highlights from 2022 or things that you really want to see this year, then do pop them down below. I would be very interested to hear from you. But again, as I said at the beginning, best wishes to you and yours for 2023. Hope it's a fantastic year for you and exceeds both 2022, 2021, 2020 and part of 2019 as well, because let's face it, the last 3 or 4 years have been pretty dire. Fingers crossed this one's a lot better, and we get out there, we have lots more fun with the hobby, and we have an awful lot more happy flying. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that, if you're trying to learn a topic, will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.